Was the sea monster that attacked and mauled this American warship? Did a giant octopus as big as Piccadilly Circus come ashore on this beach? Did the legendary serpent of the sea appear to this Cornish fisherman?
Out come the head about 3 feet away from the body. Had a good look at us. Presuming it didn't like to look away, and he just disappeared, submerged.
Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001 and inventor of the communications satellite. Now in retreat in Sri Lanka, after a lifetime of science, space and writing, he ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
I'm standing in front of my bungalow on the extreme southern tip of Sri Lanka. Just over 100 years ago, according to the London Times, which is not prone to sensational reporting, a schooner, the Pearl, of 150 tons, sailed from Galle Harbour, which is the next bay to here. That schooner sailed past here into the Bay of Bengal, and there she was attacked and sunk by a giant squid. This was observed from a P&O liner, which rescued some of the survivors from the schooner. It's an incredible story, but when one considers the enormous amount of unexplored ocean, there are 6,000 miles of empty sea from here to the icy walls of Antarctica, one can believe that out there lurked unknown and perhaps gigantic monsters still unknown to science.
The late Lieutenant R.E. Grimani Cox was returning home to England in 1942 when he encountered one of the Second World War's most nightmarish sea stories. His troopship was sunk by a German raider in the South Atlantic. Cox found himself on a fragile raft beset by sharks. After 5 days came a sinister assault. Cox showed the evidence later to a friend.
Well, when I looked at his leg, he pulled up his trousers and I could see scars the size of a penny, which is about 1.25 inches of the old penny, were dotted at intervals all the way up his leg. And these were white scars, sunk quite deep into the flesh, where the skin had been pulled off.
Before he died in 1971, Cox told the story to his sisters, as well as to his friend, a biologist, Professor Cloudsley Thompson.
Yes, he didn't show me that. He only showed me the...
He did that.
You were his sisters, and this was in the mess. There were 12 of them on the raft initially, and only 3 survived to the end of the 5 days. And one of the most horrifying things that happened while they were lying there, dying one by one from thirst, was one evening when they were attacked by a giant squid. An enormous shape appeared beside the raft, and a huge arm came over and snatched one of the men and tore him off the raft before anybody could do anything to save him. And presumably he was eaten. And they were still barely recovering from the shock of this when another arm or tentacle came over the side of the raft. He saw it silhouetted against the starlit sky, and it fastened itself on him, round his leg and round his body, particularly his right leg, because that's where the scars mainly were, as he showed me, but I believe he said that they were on the rest of his body as well. And he'd have been pulled off just like the others, only fortunately by that time people were alert, and so they grabbed on and held him. And instead of him being pulled over the side, the suckers pulled lumps of skin off him, off his body, and this is what caused these massive number of scars all over him.
On her maiden voyage out of San Diego, the U.S. Navy frigate Stein also had a weird encounter. The Stein's anti-submarine sonar gear suddenly went US, unserviceable. She sailed home. Once the family reunions were over and the ship was in dry dock, Petty Officer Ira Carpenter went down to examine the underwater dome.
We noticed that there were some quite long scratches starting from the front and the side and down underneath the dome itself. The longest one, I would say, was about 4 feet long. At the bottom of each one of these cuts, or at least 90% of the cuts, was something embedded underneath the rubber coating itself. Of course, I was interested to determine what that was. I had never seen anything like this before. This type of damage was brand new to me. So I used my knife to pick out this foreign object underneath the no-foul coating. And it looked to me like it was a claw. And I quipped to my ASW officer at the time. I said, look here, it looks like we have been attacked by a bunch of small alligators.
Navy biologist F.G. Wood.
This is a small piece of the no-foul covering that was taken from the sonar dome of this ship. In many of these cuts were found teeth or claws, such as this one. And it's apparent that whatever did this damage grasped the dome and ripped all the way through this rubber covering to the metal below.
The claw it looked like it had been wrenched out of whatever had put it there.
I think that it must be from a squid, because squids do have claws or hooks similar to this. Nothing else that is known in the ocean has structures of this kind. This doesn't rule out something that we haven't found yet, because undoubtedly there are creatures in the sea that are not yet known to science.
The Stein has since remained unscathed. But although no full-grown giant squid has ever been caught, a hint of what such creatures may be like seems to surface oddly about every 30 years in the far north, in the cold waters of the Labrador Current. This is St. John's, Newfoundland, the wartime convoy base on Canada's Atlantic coast, and headquarters for Dr. Frederick Aldrich and his team.
This is a giant squid of the species Architeuthis dux. It came ashore on November the 22nd, 1979 at St. Brendan's on Collier's Island in Bonavista Bay, Newfoundland. It's an immature female. It is a small female, but it is a giant squid. During World War II, as ships would leave the harbor, they would be torpedoed by submarines, and when the survivors would go over the sides and hit the life rafts, giant squid would surface, pull them off of the rafts, and take them to their death under the surface. I cannot help but speculate that what we know about squid and its attraction to red, I just wonder if the red life jacket of the traditional Mae West life jacket might not have been a contributing factor in the death of those seamen. These are typical suckers on an arm of the giant squid. And you'll see that in addition to the suction cup, each sucker is fitted with a ring of teeth, so that when this sucker is applied to either prey or predator, these teeth are set and anchored into the flesh at the same time that the suction cup makes contact with the flesh of the other animal. The entrance to the mouth is guarded by these large beaks, much like the beaks of a parrot, and they tear pieces off of the prey or the predator, as the case may be. The tongues and the lips of sperm whales bear sucker scars, which are approximately 12 inches in diameter. I believe the giant squid reach an approximate maximum size of something like 150 feet. If this is 20 feet long, well then it's almost 8 times longer than this in overall length, and that's a big squid.
Now that we know that the giant squid is attracted to red, I'm making sure that my equipment is an appropriate color, yellow.
Whatever size giant squid may reach, It does now seem that there really are giant octopuses, and that this man, Professor Joseph Gennaro of New York University, has evidence that one came ashore on this Florida beach in 1896. It was a local doctor, DeWitt Webb, who took charge of the carcass at Anastasia Beach, St. Augustine. He and his helpers had to use 4 horses plus 3 sets of blocks and tackle to move the body 6 tons or more up the beach. The mere stump of the one remaining tentacle was truly awesome, 32 feet long.
Perhaps an effective example of the size of the octopus which might be represented by Webb's find would be to first look at the common octopus in this position and realize that Webb's octopus would actually stretch tip to tip from here to the red car up the beach. Part of the material eventually landed in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. And all that remains of the octopus of the deep is this piece of tissue. Notice that it is sinewy and fibrous in its structure, something in the nature of beef or soup meat. When I examined these tissues, I found that that pattern, looked at in the polarizing light of the polarizing microscope, was most similar to that of the true octopus. All this gives me strong reason to believe that what Dr. Webb found was indeed a gigantic specimen of octopus.
Almost every year, surprising discoveries are made in the ocean. As recently as 1976, the U.S. Navy accidentally dredged up a totally unknown and quite large shark, the ferocious-looking megamouth, weighing almost a ton. And for centuries, there have been reports of the so-called Great Sea Serpent. Scores of captains have recorded such sightings in their ship's logs. And no skipper makes an entry in his log without a very good reason.
This happened to a Norwegian ship, and this was the monster reported by HMS Daedalus. The crew of the city of Baltimore saw the head of a serpent in the Gulf of Aden, and the bowsprit of the British banner was chewed up by a serpent in 1860. The only systematic attempt to analyze reports of the sea serpent has been launched by 2 Canadian scientists, John Seibert and Paul LeBlanc. They've concentrated on the coastal waters off Vancouver. Dozens of sightings were reported.
There were at least 25 of them who would describe species not really known to marine biology.
Seashelt, a 30-minute flight north of Vancouver, is the location of yet another report needing investigation. A local boy, John Andrews, was fishing off a pier when his sighting occurred.
Could you tell us exactly what it looked like?
I guess it looked pretty much like a long snake-like thing with fins on it. And at first sight of it, I saw a head about 1.5 feet long, about 8-9 inches wide. And it had large cat-like eyes, and they reflected light like a cat's, and they could move in opposite directions. One was looking at me and one at the bottom. And then I noticed that it was about the thickness of my thigh, almost a foot around.
The body of the animal?
Yeah. The body itself. And it was, after it had swum underneath me, I noticed that it was probably about 40 or 50 feet long.
Did it have fins?
Yeah, it had 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and it swam undulated, like up and down instead of side to side. And it swam right under me.
It's difficult to say what kind of creature John saw. It certainly doesn't match well with any kind of known mammal or any kind of known fish for that matter. The long snake-like body suggests that it's not a mammal, but its up and down undulation motion is typically mammalian.
We found that there were about 3 main categories of strange animals which had been reported. One of them was serpentine of the kind that John Andrews described to us. There was another one with a long neck and rather coarse hair like coconut fibers, as it was described by one witness. And a third category also had a long neck, but was sometimes mentioned to have a mane, and sometimes also mentioned to have horns, with a head looking like that of a sheep or like that of a giraffe.
None of the witnesses in the survey were professional artists. But it's clear enough from the drawings in their questionnaires what they thought they saw. This is John Andrews' sketch of his sighting. Margaret Stout saw this in 1961, and David Miller saw this creature off Discovery Island. But it may be that the body of such a sea monster has fallen into the hands of man. In September 1977, this Japanese fishing boat was off the east coast of New Zealand when it trawled up in its nets a mystifying carcass. The Japanese TV networks were excited enough to helicopter teams out over the South Pacific and winch their reporters down onto the ship at sea. On the deck of the Zuyo Maru, the skipper talked to journalists.
On April the 25th at about 10:30, we noticed something big caught in the nets. It was a red, fleshy object which smelled very strongly. We didn't know what it was, so I went for my camera and flash gun.
Sadly, the body itself was afterwards thrown back. But early in 1980, one of the world's leading fisheries experts, Professor Fujio Yasuda, arrived for a conference in London with such evidence as remains.
This is all the evidence about the unknown creature dredged from the sea by the Zuyo Maru off New Zealand on the 25th of April 1977. These photographs were taken by Mr. Yano of Taiyo Fisheries. The real half of the body was rotten and dropped off. As you can see in this photograph, the surface of the body is covered with a fat-like substance. This is the drawing made by Mr. Yano after measuring the creature. I can't think of any known fish which has this shape. I can't tell what this creature is, but I assure you that it is completely unknown to us.
But sea monsters don't only materialize in the remote oceans. In 1976, just 30 miles off the Lizard in Cornwall, two fishermen, George Vinicum and John Cox, also met a monster.
Well, it was steaming 30 miles off, 25 to 30 miles off. Saw what I thought was an upturned boat on the horizon.
So we went over to investigate. When we got closer, we could see it wasn't an upturned boat. It was something that, well, neither of us have seen before. So it was dark in color and had sort of humps on the back. As you say, it was, well, between 15 and 18 feet in length and rising above the sea about 3 feet. It was a flat, calm day. There was no disturbance on the sea at all.
When we got up closer, went a little closer, I came astern, to our amazement, up out the water about 3 feet from this body, head appeared out the water. And it was a, well, thing I've never seen before after about 40 years of sea. And it gradually sank in the water and disappeared. But after talking about it, the only thing we could explain it was very much like a prehistoric animal.
The whole thing, I suppose, would have weighed, what, several tons. And equal in size, I should think, the boat we were in. Wouldn't you? The boat was 32 feet long.
Although whales and many sea creatures occasionally come ashore, there seem to be few records of a stranded sea monster. One of the most celebrated, however, occurred in 1808 beneath the cliffs of the island of Stronsa in Orkney. Precise drawings were made of the Stronsa beast at the time, and its dimensions were carefully measured. More than 50 witnesses swore to what they had seen. Today, among the other exotic exhibits at the Royal Scottish Museum in Edinburgh, is a piece of the backbone of the Stronsa beast. It's now in the care of Dr. Jeff Swinney.
This was an animal which was described as being some 55 feet long. It was described as having a mane of hair running down the full length of the back, a tiny little head, a long neck, and many of the eyewitnesses, all the eyewitnesses who gave evidence on what they saw of this monster, quite reasonably interpreted this as being a totally new beast, a creature that they were completely unfamiliar with. Well, in the December of 1977, I was fortunate enough in being able to examine a beast which was stranded on the shore of the Tay near Carnoustie. These are the vertebrae of that animal, a basking shark. And I think the inevitable conclusion is that the animal which was stranded in Stronsa, in the Orkneys, was a basking shark. What tends to happen when a basking shark dies and the carcass rots is that the cartilages which are supporting the snout here tend to drop away. So these go, the snout goes. The large area here which contains the gill tissues falls away. So all that lot goes. And what we're left with is a small skull in this region and a long vertebral column here, which tends to give the appearance of a very small-headed creature with a long neck. The fins tend to fray out. And in the case of a male, another set of what might appear to be limbs would be in this region here, and the lower lobe of the tail tends to fall away. So what we're left with is this small-headed, long-necked creature with this long, tapering body.
But a rotting basking shark certainly doesn't explain the beast with great teeth, basking sharks are tiny, which came ashore, also in Scotland, at Gourock on the River Clyde in 1942. Being wartime, the Royal Navy wouldn't permit photographs. And finally, the beast was taken to the grounds of the municipal incinerator. On the orders of the borough surveyor, Charles Rankin, it was chopped up and buried under what is now the football pitch of St Ninian's Roman Catholic Primary School, Gourock. Mr. Rankin.
I can't see that this carcass was a rotting basking shark. In the first place, this animal showed no signs of rotting. It was absolutely complete, unmarred. The monster measured approximately 28 feet from the tip of the nose to the end of the tail. The body, as it lay on the ground, was approximately 5 to 6 feet deep. The body could be described as having three parts: the body, the neck and the tail, and the neck and tail tapered very gradually away from the body. The animal had teeth about perhaps that size, and on both jaws. In the stomach of the creature was a small portion of what I took to be a seaman's jersey. It was an open knitted portion of some knitted material. And the other thing, strangely enough, was the corner of what can be described as an old-fashioned tablecloth. Just the corner, and it was complete with tassels.
The evidence for still unknown sea monsters is almost overwhelming. As for the great sea serpent, it too probably exists, except that it may not be a serpent, and there may be several different types of animal involved. The solution to this old mystery may come quite soon. At this moment, the two greatest powers on Earth are trying to develop sonar systems which will make the seas transparent so they can track each other's nuclear submarines. Those systems will locate the sea serpent if it exists. Indeed, at this moment, the evidence for its existence may be somewhere in the Pentagon or the Kremlin.
tonight, the hunt for the world's missing ape men. In the wild tracts of the Pacific northwest of America, men are now out to try to kill the ape man. Indeed, is this uniquely film of Bigfoot, the Yeti of the United States? Is this the footprint of the abominable snowman of the Himalayas? Lord Hunt of Everest fame is a believer. Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001 and inventor of the communications satellite. Now in retreat in Sri Lanka, after a lifetime of science, space, and writing, he ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
It may seem incredible that creatures like large man-apes can still exist in the modern world. Yet the evidence for this is now quite considerable.
It's in the high valleys around Mount Everest that the Yeti, the abominable snowman of the Himalayas, seems most vivid. For the Sherpas of the high mountains, there are no doubts. The Yeti is woven into their rituals and their lives. Kunjo Chumbi is the headman of the Kumjong village. He has seen the Yeti. In the monastery above the village, he keeps what he believes to be its scalp, preserved as a relic in a box. With some assurance, he imitates the Yeti's cry. That cry is listened to in fear by the Sherpas. 6 years ago, Lakpa Damani heard it close by.
A Yeti came and attacked me and threw me in the river. His face was very black and he looked like a very old man. I was unconscious for a couple of hours. When I woke up, I saw the Yeti had killed some yaks and a cow.
She says the Yeti had picked up and thrown into the river her.
The Yeti looms throughout the myths and legends of the Nepalese people. Desmond Doig, with Sir Edmund Hillary, led the biggest expedition to hunt for the Yeti. He found that the Sherpas had the most precise physical description of the creature.
To the Sherpas, he's got a conical scalp, rather pointed ears, splayed nose, he's shaggy, he's bald around the chest and his tummy, and has a fairly human face. He's very nasty tempered, very, very nasty indeed, and is known to rip people apart if he gets a chance.
Doig's expedition wrote off the Yeti, wrongly he now feels, as an Oriental fantasy.
I'm afraid our expedition was a great gaudy mess. Any self-respecting Yeti would have kept way, way away from us. We had 600 coolies. We had about 200 Sherpas, and there were about 40 of us in the most beautifully designed and coloured anoraks. Our tents were all vividly coloured. We smelt different, we looked different, we behaved differently to the local people, and the smells of our cooking must have horrified everything within smelling distance. Well, the hard, rather soulless results of the expedition was that the Yeti didn't exist.
Other expeditions have also failed to snare the abominable snowman. But for 50 years now, Westerners have continually been coming back with new testimony. Emil Wick is one of the world's most experienced mountain flyers. Two years ago, he was taking a party of Japanese tourists on a flight over Kanchenjunga.
I saw on one of the hills some tracks I have never seen before in my life, really. So I went closer with the plane. I was watching. Are there some paper? Are there some empty tins, cigarettes, whatever? But it was absolutely clear. Only the prints were there. And from there, 4 of these tracks went to the Chamlang side, to the north. And I wanted to follow also, but the lady which was sitting on my right seat said, "Captain, very sorry for that, but we paid the Kanchenjunga flight and not the pleasure flight for you."
In 1951, photographs of footprints were taken on the borders of Tibet by the late Eric Shipton and Dr. Michael Ward.
There was no doubt about it. They were unlike anything that either Eric Shipton or I had ever seen or even imagined before. They were very clearly etched in the snow. The snow was about, I suppose, 3 inches deep on top of hard ice. And you can see that there are 5 toes definitely outlined. The big toe here, second there, third there, fourth there, and you can see a small toe there. You can see that the actual track itself is very, very clear-cut. And you can also see that over here at the heel is obviously a place where there has been a lot of weight there. And I suggest that probably what happened was that the animal put down its heel there and walked. The dimensions of the print are approximately 12 inches long and probably something of the order of 5 to 6 inches wide. I don't think there's any possibility of there being distortions of other animals' tracks at all. The various ideas have been put forward that this one, for instance, might have been the imprint of 2 feet, one on top of the other, but I just don't think that's on at all. I just don't think that's possible.
This print was photographed in the Dudkosi Valley in 1978 by the leader of the team which first conquered Everest, Lord Hunt.
The creature had broken through some pretty heavy crust on the snow. It was deep snow on a rather steep little slope. And the creature was a heavy one because he'd broken through hard crust on which, as far as we were concerned, we could walk around without making any impression through the snow at all. You could see through the snow, in the soft snow underneath the crust, the toe impressions. I don't think they were bear tracks because the Sherpas, whenever I've talked to them about this, and in fact when I've been with Sherpas seeing tracks, they have been quite emphatic that these are not bears, that they are Yeti.
In pictures taken by a French Jesuit priest, Abbé Bourdet, the toes again show very clearly.
Ce n'est certainement pas un singe. Ce n'est pas un ours non plus.
It is certainly not an ape, nor a bear, because a bear has claws, and this creature has not. So I think it is a special kind of animal that we don't really know anything about because we don't have an exact description. But I have spoken about it to some paleontologists, and they are rather inclined to believe that we are dealing with an animal from the pre-human era, that is to say, one of our distant ancestors.
The Outward Bound School at Ullswater is run by Squadron Leader Lester Davis, Royal Air Force.
That's great. That's lovely. Good, that's well done.
He was on the 1959 RAF expedition to the Kulti Valley when he too came across tracks in the snow.
It sunk in about 5 inches. I, with cine cameras and things, was weighing about 12.5 stone and only went in about 1.5 inches. I thought, well, this thing is huge. The snow had been undercut by this fast glacial stream and I fell in. And I had held my camera above my head because it came up to my armpits before my feet touched the bottom. Well, it was icy cold and I scrambled out and just beside these footprints. And immediately we suddenly realized this animal, or yeti or whatever, it had just stepped out using only its 2 hind legs. And the chaps at the British Museum, they said this establishes its height is about 8 foot and its weight is about 60 stone.
Sightings of the Yeti by Westerners are rare, but in 1970 the English climber Don Willans was on his way to the conquest of one of the world's toughest mountains. Annapurna by the south face.
I heard what sounded like bird cries from at the back of me, and I looked at the Sherpa and he said, "Yeti coming, Saab." So I whipped round and looked up the mountain and I saw 2 black crows flying away and a black shape drop behind the ridge. Well, my first thoughts were, Christ, what do I do now? Grab the ice axe or what?
What he did do was photograph the tracks. Next night it reappeared and he was watching it again.
And then quite suddenly it was almost as if it realised that it was being watched, so to speak. Quite suddenly it shot across the whole slope of the mountain. It must have travelled half a mile in a diagonal line downwards, and it was obviously heading towards a rocky cliff or some rocky outcrop there. And it disappeared into the shadow by the rocks, and that was the last I actually ever saw of it.
So how strong is the evidence?
It is not beyond the bounds of possibility that a creature like the Yeti does exist in some remote parts of the world.
I personally now stick my neck out and say I'm a firm believer in the Yeti.
I think it's a very strong case to answer. Having eliminated bears in my own mind, I can find no other explanation but that there is an unidentified creature still to be discovered.
It's noticeable that the hard evidence comes from Western visitors and consists mostly of photographs of footprints, which vary considerably. However, we do know that melting snow can play strange tricks. As for the Sherpas, their stories of the Yeti seem inextricably bound up with their religion, and it's hard to separate myth from reality. In America, however, the evidence for Bigfoot is much more straightforward.
Indeed, Dr. Grover Krantz, one of the anthropologists who has studied Bigfoot, or the Sasquatch as the Indians call it, is so certain that a man-ape exists in the northwest of the United States that he goes out regularly to try to track and kill just one specimen.
I'm convinced that these creatures exist for a variety of reasons. One of these, perhaps the most important to me, is a careful study of the footprints that has satisfied me that in at least some cases these footprints could not have been faked. But more than that, there are sightings by reputable citizens, some by disreputable citizens, but the number of good sightings that seem to be unshakable is now numbering in the many hundreds that I am personally aware of, and they probably number in the thousands at least. The number of Sasquatch is very difficult to estimate, of course, but within the northwestern part of the United States, I would be inclined to estimate in the vicinity of 200, with perhaps at least an equal number in the adjacent parts of western Canada. If there were fewer than that, then it does not seem to be a viable breeding population. Any more than that, I would think they'd be seen more often. Here in the Pacific Northwest, there are thousands of square miles of empty, desolate country where nobody lives. Almost never does anybody travel through it, and something like the Sasquatch could quite easily live here, being only occasionally seen, and no remains ever being found is not at all surprising.
The sightings of Bigfoot spread right across the northwest United States. This is Washington State. Sergeant Larry Gamache was driving home one night with his family and sister-in-law Kathy.
I noticed quite a distance ahead of me an object move out of the dense forest towards the clearing between the forest and the highway. And I started to slow then, and as I got a little bit closer, I noticed it was walking very much like a human. Arms down at its side, swinging just in a normal walking gait.
It just got bigger and bigger as we went closer to it. And it was hairy and just didn't look, well, I wanted to close my eyes, but you didn't want to. You want to look, you want to see what you're going to see, but yet you don't.
The most impressive thing was the human features in the way that it walked. The fact that the facial area wasn't really covered with a lot of hair. The eyes, seemed normal as I looked through the windshield at him. And the height, the size, just the sheer physical size of it, it had to have been, in comparison to what I can relate back to today, 7, maybe 7.5 feet tall. Because I had to physically look up through the windshield to see the face and the head. And I was in a pickup truck, so they sit up quite a bit higher than a car. So it was at least 7 feet, maybe 300, 350 pounds.
Bigfoot now emerges often enough to get on television news. This is KFYR, Bismarck, North Dakota.
It's here, in and around Little Eagle, South Dakota, where there have never before been any sightings of the so-called Bigfoot or Sasquatch, where the people of this small community are now becoming believers. There have been 17 sightings of the creature in the past month. The latest sighting was at the Shooting Bear residence on a bluff overlooking the town. Last Tuesday night, Hannah Shooting Bear saw the creature from her house while it was looking in the window of her daughter's trailer about 30 yards away. Elderly Hannah was the only one to see the creature, but her son-in-law is reported to have fired several rifle shots into the air after it had moved off. What do you think they ought to do about him around here?
Kill him. He might hurt somebody.
Despite that recommendation, the Bigfoot hunters want to keep him alive. Their plan is to lure him into an area where they can either take his picture or shoot him with a tranquilizer. They believe in the notion suggested by an outsider that Bigfoot is attracted to menstruating women. This bait consisted of some used feminine articles. Dennis Newman reporting from Little Eagle, South Dakota.
Across the mountains on the Pacific coast in Washington State, veteran hunter and Rockingham County police officer Kenny Cooper was driving along this road when he heard a weird noise.
I was coming down north on this road here, and I heard some noise screaming back in here. And all the time I was going along, he was screaming. And everybody in Whatcom County could hear it because I did have the police mic outside. So they were listening to whatever it was that I was hearing. And the noise that was coming from that creature is what was on the recorder here. We took that recording, we sent it into the lab to have it analyzed, and it came back that there's no metallic noises in the recording, indicating that it wasn't made by some kind of a machine. And they said there's no voice, no human has vocal cords enough to throw the high pitches and the low pitches at the same time that was coming from that.
But it was Bob Gimlin and his friend Roger Patterson out trekking at Bluff Creek in Northern California who were the ones to suddenly find a large hairy creature appear in front of them when they actually had a loaded cine camera with them.
We came around a bend in the creek, and there stood a big, hairy, human-like creature. It appeared to be between 6 and 7 feet tall. The creature looked at us for a few seconds, turned and walked slowly away. And it was kind of in a loamy type soil, left good footprints. It walked directly away from us at just a slow stroll, just like a man would be walking away from something downtown. It never did break into a run. Well, the animal appeared to be a female due to the fact that it appeared to have mammary glands. And the thing walked very agile, very fluently, and it had huge, bulky muscles. An overall description, it looked like a huge, hairy human being.
Well, English and Russian scientists have analyzed this film very carefully, and they've concluded that the stride is quite unhuman and be very difficult for a man to imitate. However, I think we showed in the beginning of 2001 that skilled mimes can make completely convincing ape men. So this is not proven.
But the Patterson film did have backup evidence, which is now in the hands of Dr. Grover Krantz.
By far the most convincing evidence is the plaster casts that I've got here of the footprints. I'll show you some of them here. For instance, here is a track that was cast right after Roger Patterson made his movie in Northern California. The imprint of the foot not only pressed into the ground, but also in pushing off, it raised a mound of dirt in the middle of the footprint. And this indicates that it was a flexible foot, and a rigid fake could not have made this. That's not as convincing as this other track. This is a 17-inch track that was picked up in northeastern Washington state. And this is what was evidently a crippled individual, because here we have two tracks of the same individual. You're looking at the bottom of the feet. And this right foot is crippled. It is distorted lengthwise, bent, missing one toe. And most critically, the two bulges on the outside of the foot represent spaces between bones. And if this had been just a gigantic human foot, or some kind of fake like that, these bulges and the bone spaces should have been set farther back. The fact of where they are indicates that this is a foot designed with different leverage, a longer heel, shorter forepart, which is exactly what would have to be done to make a foot that would lift an 800-pound animal.
Homesteader Grover Kiggins and his daughter Millie saw evidence that Bigfoot has a stride to match the size of its feet. They were out near their farm in Oregon when they saw some tracks.
We measured them. Dad had his rule. We measured him when we went up. He stepped 67.5 inches, which is a long step. And then when he went down, he came down the road, and when he stopped at the edge of the road, he went off the road into the timber, down into the brush and timber. He stepped 7 feet when he stepped down in there. And I followed him for a little ways down in there, but I decided I didn't want to go down in there and see what made those tracks.
And in one place, he come to a fence, about a 4-foot barbed wire fence. He just stepped over that like it wasn't there. I had to crawl through or under.
I think Bigfoot is an animal that we already know from the fossil record. I'll show you a specimen here. This is a cast of the lower jaw of what we call the Gigantopithecus. This lived in China about 500,000 to 1 million years ago. I'd like to compare this with the gorilla. This is a cast of a gorilla's skull, so you can see the size of this thing. This was an animal that probably weighed about 400 pounds in the wild. And just looking at the lower jaw alone, what's perhaps most interesting is from the underside of the jaw, there is a difference. In the gorilla, the two sides of the jaw spread only modestly as you go back, because the gorilla's neck is so far behind the lower jaw. If that neck were moved forward, the jaw would have to widen to make space. In the Gigantopithecus, the jaw is spreading at a much wider angle, and the only obvious reason for that is the neck is in the way, and that means the head was set on top of the body instead of hung forward, and it's a fair presumption that this was an erect bipedal animal. So we end up with the description of Gigantopithecus being an erect biped, standing perhaps 8 feet tall, weighing about 800 pounds, and being presumably covered with hair. This was too early to have cultural activity, probably no more intelligent than an ape, and this, of course, is an exact description of the living Sasquatch.
Personally, I'd be less skeptical of ape men if there weren't so many of them. It's hard to believe that something like Bigfoot could remain undetected in America. If anyone gave me $100 to bet on it, well, I'd put 40 on the Yeti, 10 on Bigfoot, and I'd keep the 50 for myself.
From the jungles of South America, is this an unknown ape? In the forests of the Congo, how huge was this snake which rose up and menaced a helicopter? In Mozambique, could this be an unknown species of big cat? In the Pacific, did this man see the legendary dragon of New Guinea? Did the mammoth and the supposedly extinct creatures of the Ice Age really all die out? Mysteries from the Files of Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001 and inventor of the communication satellite. Now in Sri Lanka, after a lifetime of science, space, and writing, he contemplates the mysteries of this and other worlds.
Even in this small island, there are reports of strange animals not yet positively identified. The horned jackal, and the devil bird with its hideous strangled shriek. Yet this jungle, even though it stretches as far as the eye can see, is nothing compared with the forests which cover much of Africa and South America. There's room for a whole zoo full of unknown animals there. And looking at this, I'm reminded of a riddle posed by an old philosopher. What is the most cunning of all the animals? That which no man has yet seen.
In downtown Chicago, the university's professor of biology on a shopping expedition.
What is all of this you have?
Well, a jungle machete, a jungle hammock, some medical supplies for the tropics, and a backpack.
Where are you off to with it?
Well, you may not believe this. We're off to Africa to look for dinosaurs.
For it's in the Congo that Professor Roy Mackal and his colleague, explorer James Powell, really believe, from many reports, that there may exist a living dinosaur, or something like it.
The animal is described as being as big as an elephant, or at least as big as a hippopotamus. It has a long head and neck and a long tail. It has feet that are like a hippopotamus, but it has 3 claws on each of these feet. Every kind of animal that we can think of that is alive today doesn't fit this picture. The closest it comes to, and amazing as this may seem, is a dinosaur that is extinct perhaps 65 to 70 million years.
It does have an almost perfect resemblance to certain types of dinosaurs, particularly the 3-clawed footprint. That's almost the trademark of certain long-necked dinosaurs. What really got me onto this was in 1976, I had a grant from the Explorers Club of New York to study rainforest crocodiles in the Gabon, which is a country immediately to the west of Congo. And since I had read about these reports, I decided to see if I could come across any similar information. So among the Fang tribesmen, I tried a little, you might say, flashcard test. I first of all showed them pictures of 5 animals which are reasonably common in the Gabon jungles. And in each case I would say, can you recognize this animal? What is it? He says, sure, of course, that's an elephant, that's a gorilla, that's a leopard, etc. These things live around here in the jungle. We know them. Then just as a control test, I showed him a picture of a bear. Now, there are no bear in Africa, so far as we know. And I said, do you know that animal? He said, no, we've never seen this. That animal not live around here. Then, just matter-of-factly, I showed him this. It's a picture of a diplodocus from a children's book on dinosaurs. I said, do you know that animal? And in several different villages, representing at least 2 different cultural groups, I would get consistent answers. Yes, that's the Nyamala. We know that animal. It lives back in the deep lakes, deep in the jungles.
Well, the evidence is strong enough that there seems to be some strange animal in this Congo. And if it's a dinosaur, it would be interesting enough for us to leave Chicago, the bright lights, the ghost of Mayor Daley, and go to the Congo.
Thus inspired, Chicago's Congo Expedition 1980 equips itself for the unknown.
Well, since the hammock works, James, I think I'll try on this mosquito hat. It won't keep out any mosquitoes, but let's see if it keeps out the snowflakes today.
Oh, that is great, a Parisian original.
It feels warmer already. I don't feel any snowflakes, so it must work on mosquitoes, too. Somehow it doesn't look like the picture, does it?
Well, that may sound a little crazy, and later we'll see what happened to them. But remember that until quite recently, people refused to believe in the mountain gorilla, the okapi, the Komodo dragon. They were all discovered in this century.
Even the panda's a recent arrival.
It was literally pandemonium when San Francisco gave an all-American welcome to a real VIP, a very important panda. Baby Sulin is the first giant panda to be brought to captivity. Now it's tea time with Mrs. Ruth Harkness. During a grueling expedition in China, she found Sulin crying in a hollow tree. But ever seen a happier panda than this?
The okapi was dismissed as a fantasy of the pygmies, the mountain gorilla too, until the first specimens were killed. Who would believe the current stories of a saber-toothed killer loose even now in the Australian bush if we didn't have evidence on film that the ferocious Tasmanian tiger, this is the last one known, was still alive in Hobart Zoo in 1933. Snakes that can swallow a donkey look like Swiss Family Robinson fiction, except we do have eyewitnesses and even photographs. This giant anaconda was killed on the Amazon. According to a Rio paper, it was 130 feet long. This one was dispatched on the banks of the Mogiachu River in the interior of Brazil. When this snake, allegedly 115 feet in length, emerged from the river Oyapock, the militia were called out to machine gun it. But it was in Africa, the Congo, that an undoubtedly monstrous specimen appeared to confront this Belgian helicopter pilot, Remy van Leerde, as he returned from a mission in 1959.
So as we had a camera on board, I decided to make several passes over the hole where the snake was in able to let the man take a picture of it. And I made certainly between 4 and 6 passes right over the hole where the snake was in. By then I was already flying for 25 years, so I have a very good experience of measuring things. And I would say the snake I saw there was close to 50 foot. Close to 50 feet. I don't know, you say 50 foot or 50 feet, but very close to, certainly. And it was moving inside the hole and looking very dark green, deep green, brown, with his belly white. Now when I came down on that snake in his hole, and I would say at about 25, 30 foot up, the snake raised up by about, I would say, 10 foot. And I could very clearly and closely see the head, which was looking, and I could not make a better comparison, as with a very large horse, with big, very, very big jaws, looking triangular. and you're just standing up like there to me, and I feel and I'm convinced if I had been in its range, it would have struck at me, it would have been striking me. And yet, I would say it was certainly at least on the valley 2 foot wide and 3 foot long. It could have easily eaten up a man.
This is one of those rare cases where we have an expert witness and an excellent photograph. Analysis of the ground features suggests that this animal was indeed at least 40 feet long. So monstrous snakes do exist. On the other hand, there's been a reward out for at least 60 years, initiated by Theodore Roosevelt, now worth $15,000, for any snake over 30 feet long, and no one has yet claimed it. Another controversial animal for which an excellent photograph exists is Lois's monkey.
It was 1920 when from the Maracaibo jungle of Venezuela, these 4 gaunt and desperate figures emerged, the last remnants of a 20-strong expedition of Europeans who set off up the Rio Catatumbo 3 years before. All the rest had died, victims of fever or of the poisoned arrows of the Motilone Indians. But one of them, geologist Dr. Francis de Lois, still had with him one extraordinary picture, which was to divide the zoological world for 50 years. Could it really be an unknown ape? Yes, said Georges Montandon, France's most eminent zoologist. And he christened it Amer Anthropoidis loisi, Lois's ape, though no ape had ever been known in America. But his deadly rival across the channel, Sir Arthur Keith, Fellow of the Royal Society, denounced the whole thing as a fraud or a nonsense. With academic scorn, he quoted de Lois's own account in the Illustrated London News, telling of 2 creatures which had attacked de Lois's party by the unorthodox means of defecating into their hands and throwing their droppings at the foe. The creature was merely a South American spider monkey, said Sir Arthur, with the tail either cut off or hidden. Dr. Montandon was not to be intimidated. He got his cousin, who worked for Standard Oil in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to send him a standard petrol tin packing case, as seen in the original photograph. Upon this, Montandon placed first a standard spider monkey, and then a standard Frenchman. Comparisons seem to make Lois's ape well over 4 feet tall. For Montandon, it was convincing proof. Since that day, no further evidence of a great ape has emerged from South America to vindicate Dr. Montandon or destroy theories of a hoax. But the question remains, why should a Swiss geologist, not much interested in zoology, his companions dying or being murdered all around him, be bothered to fake a picture? For that reason, if for no other, Lois's ape remains a mystery. But the mystery of the king cheetah, for 50 years the obsession of white hunters in southern Africa, does now seem near a solution. Paul and Lena Bottriel sold everything they had, even their house, in order to pursue the legend of a beast, ferocious and striped, more like a tiger, which ran with the cheetahs.
The normal cheetah we've known of for 5,000 years, and they've been absolutely identical. The Kublai Khan had 1,000 in his kennels, and many of these great princes and kings have had paintings and wall edgings done, and they've all shown the cheetah as we know, the normal spotted cheetah used for hunting, and there's been no difference for 5,000 years. And suddenly, in the last 50 years, we've come up with a cheetah which has these stripes and is completely different. There are some 26 skins. And as I say, everyone is absolutely standard. Stripes here, and the final part of the tail being ringed as with the tiger, which is a striped cat.
The Bottriels hired a balloon to search silently over the bush, until on the Mozambique border, they cornered their prey.
And it was finally in Kruger Park that we found a live king cheetah. that had been there for a number of years, and no one had really known about it, photographed it and filmed it.
This is the only known film of the striped king cheetah, running here with ordinary spotted cheetahs.
The theories are that it could be a hybrid, or alternatively, it's a mutation, being a strange pattern thrown up once in every few generations. Or thirdly, a species, which in fact is avoided man and is living in the area of Rhodesia, Mozambique, South Africa, Mozambique.
We could find a completely different species of animal, we don't know, and that in itself is enough to fight for and try and achieve.
What may be a baby version of the legendary New Guinea dragon has also been filmed. It is said to kill dogs and wallabies and to grow to 20, 30, even 40 feet. In 1979, a 6-foot specimen was shot near the River Fly, and naturalist Ian Redmond determined to look for a full-grown dragon.
We were staking out water holes because the lizard has to come for water every day, and some of the water holes are in a creek bed, so you're below the level of the forest floor in a creek bed by a pool. And one day there were two of us a few hundred yards apart. I was sitting by one pool and another chap by another pool, and I'd been sitting there for several hours with nothing happening. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I heard these footsteps. It's a forest floor, so there's lots of dry leaves on the floor. Just these quiet, softly scrunching of dry leaves. Now, if you hear a lizard moving through the forest, it's a scurrying sound. It doesn't sound like footsteps, and I thought it must be either the other chap coming over, whether it was playing about and trying to sneak up on me. I didn't know, but it sounded very stealthy. So I'm sitting down there, and I hear this coming up behind me, and obviously you decide at some point you've got to have a look. So as they were getting closer, I thought, well, person or animal, I'm going to see what it is. So I slowly sat up and looked around, and about 10 feet away, my eyes were about on the level of the bank, about 10 feet away there was a log, and just over the log was this great lizard head. Now I couldn't see the whole body, but I could see that the head and shoulders were a lot bigger than the one which had been shot. So I went down for my camera again, and as I went down to get my camera, the lizard moved away.
But the hunt for another of the world's tantalizing missing creatures has help from all the latest gear that Japanese technology can muster. These Japanese are in Fiordland, in the far southwest of New Zealand, looking for the largest bird that ever lived, the 12-foot-high moa. Excavations all over South Island have produced the massive bones of the moa. Flocks of their skeletons dominate New Zealand's museums. The moa certainly seems to have been seen as late as 1860, and one witness, Mrs. Alice Mackenzie, said she saw one on the sand at Martin's Bay in 1883.
And it took no notice of me when I came near it. And I got nearer and nearer until I sat down on the sand behind it. And it was a bluish color, just a faded bluish gray color.
From the structure of the neck and head bones, and with the help of a computer, the Japanese have ingeniously constructed what they believe may have been the call of the moa. Armed with the tape and stories that the call has indeed been heard in recent times, they set off into the forest, hoping for, yet perhaps fearing, a response from a bird that was supposedly able to split a man's skull with its beak or kill him with a kick. Sadly, there was no reply. The most puzzling of all the stories of missing animals comes from the snowy regions of Siberia, the disappearance of the great hairy mammoth. Professor Vereshchagin has been on the trail of the Siberian mammoth for 40 years.
И когда я бывал на Индигирке, в среднем течении, среди зарослей...
When I was camping beside the river in Digirka in Yakutia, it seemed to me that at any moment from out of the dense undergrowth, the head of a mammoth with its hairy trunk might appear and wander into one of the clearings among the valleys. It is ideal mammoth country.
Долины реки Индигирки.
On expeditions to Yakutia in the far north of Siberia, Professor Vereshchagin and other Soviet scientists have found the tusks and bones of hundreds of thousands of mammoths, which seem to have died in some sudden catastrophe. But back in Leningrad, Professor Vereshchagin does have one of the remarkable specimens which just occasionally emerge from the frozen soil of the tundra. A whole mammoth, fresh frozen for 10,000 years. This is the Berezovka mammoth, just as it was found having fallen down a ravine and been asphyxiated.
И вот эта внезапная смерть, она подтверждается несколькими
Its pelvis was broken, and in its mouth there was still a piece of food, a clump of grass which had not yet been chewed.
There have always been tales that mammoths still live in Siberia. And then, in 1977, some Soviet gold miners found a baby mammoth in almost perfect condition. Amid great excitement, it was brought back to the Leningrad Museum. But Professor Vereshchagin is sure it died at least 10,000 years ago.
Первобытная орда производила охоту.
The mother was killed by hunters. This baby was wounded by a spear in the right leg. It managed to get away, but died of starvation.
But the discovery of the baby mammoth has produced a possibility even more exotic than the thought that the mammoth could be still alive. Next time a mammoth is found, Russian scientists are going to take some of its frozen body cells and try to clone it. That is, grow, as is now theoretically possible, a new living mammoth from the cells of a body dead but preserved for 10,000 years. Meanwhile, in the winter gloom of Kennedy Airport, the two intrepid dinosaur hunters return from their quest in the Congo.
This expedition into the Congo was the most difficult thing that we've ever done, but it was well worth it.
It was both the best and the worst that I've been on. In the sense, it was the worst in terms of the difficulties encountered, but it's the most exciting in the results of any of the African things I've been on.
I remember walking through muck, slipping into slime up to my ankles, up to my waist at times. I remember the complete exhaustion every half an hour. When you couldn't get another breath of fresh air, you couldn't take another step. We were looking for eyewitness observers, and we gradually began to zero in on the geographical part of this area where eyewitness observers were concentrated. And using that technique, we were able to come to the center of the reports, to a place where actually the animals are alleged to be. They told us about how, about 1959, 3 of these animals, possibly 2, had been coming into Lac Telly. And this had disturbed the fishing of the pygmies. So the pygmies decided they're going to stop this and started to drive stakes in across the opening into the lake. This prevented the animals from coming in, but one was while it was attempting to get through the stakes, was speared by the pygmies. They proceeded to kill the animal and cut it up into slices. The report from the observer was that it took forever because of the long tail and the long neck. They described it as being about 30 feet long, with a head and neck 2 to 3 meters long, some 6 to 9 feet, looking much like a large snake, but attached to a thick body.
What was maddening about it was that at Adipena, we were I would say about 25 airline miles from Loch Telly, which is one of the places where there might conceivably still be living specimens of this creature. We were unable to reach the lake because it would have taken from 2 to 3 days to get into the lake, a comparable amount of time to march out, and we would have wanted to stay, sometime at the lake. And we would not have had time to get out of the country before our visas expired.
As we went along and gathered this information, I became more and more convinced that we are dealing with a real animal, perhaps extinct in a very recent past, but still a real animal. Yet if we believe what the Congolese and the Pygmies told us, the animals are still alive today in certain parts of the Bai River, which is a tributary of the Likwala, perhaps even in the Likwala and perhaps Lake Telly. We conclude that there is indeed a real animal and that this animal is a species which is unknown to science in a living form.
So this case remains not proven. But if our exhausted heroes had been able to get their visas extended, they might have found what they were looking for. I think we've given enough evidence to suggest that very large, strange, and possibly amazing creatures may still exist in the remote places of this world. But while they're protected by jungles and swamps and various African bureaucracies, they may be safe from detection for a long time to come.